Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. We're excited to be here and speak to you about IVDR compliance, tips, and best practice. My name is Kelly Stanton. I'm the Director of Quality here at Qualio. Joining me on this topic today is Sumatha Kondabalu, one of our Senior Quality Specialists. Sumatha has very nearly 20 years experience in the medical devices space, all manner of regulations, US, European, Canada. She herself resides in Canada. I'm in Denver, Colorado, so good morning. Although I believe most of you are joining us from Europe, so welcome, and good afternoon to you all. I just want to encourage you all today to put your questions into the Q&A box. We look forward to this being a little bit interactive. We will try to answer your questions as we go along, or we will try to get to them at the end. And if we are unable to get to the questions, we will definitely follow up with you after the event to try to get your questions answered. Excuse me. We will also be sending you an email with the link to the recording of this presentation after the presentation is complete. So with that, let's get started. Today, we're going to do a bit of an overview of IVDR, what the regulations say, key actions you need to take before the launch date, some major changes compared to previous versions of the regulations, new classification as it applies to the in vitro diagnostics, and then some compliance tips and best practices to ensure that you are meeting the requirements of the regulations. And hopefully, as I said, we will get to some questions at the end of the presentation. Just a quick disclaimer. These slides represent Sumatha and my personal opinions and interpretations. This is not a position of Qualio. We are not a regulatory firm, although we do operate in the space and have a lot of experience and knowledge. And we sourced our material from various EU IVDR documents and communications that are available in the public forum. This information is based on our current understanding. So, introduction. An in vitro diagnostic medical device means any medical device, which is a reagent product, calibrator, control material, kit, instrument, apparatus, piece of equipment, software, or system, whether used alone or in combination, intended by the manufacturer to be used in vitro for the examination of specimens, including blood, tissue donations, et cetera, and we are about supporting diagnosis as given by medical professionals. Some receptacles are also considered part of the devices. And those can be vacuum type or not, specifically intended by its manufacturer for primary containment and preservation of specimens derived from the human body for the purpose of in vitro diagnostic examination. Quick poll for you guys. What is your current level of IVDR preparedness? Are you feeling well prepared? Only a little prepared? If you're not even started, do let us know, please, where you are. You should be seeing a poll in your Zoom window. All right. Thank you for wrapping that up. Wow, it looks like about 38% of you have not yet started. Better get moving. Some of you are in very early stages, about 19%. About 24% of you said you are somewhat prepared. You've got your working groups designated, maybe you're working through your gap analysis. 19% of you said you were very prepared, meaning your working groups meeting regularly, your gap analysis is completed, and maybe you're working through the actions that you've identified, but that 38% of you who've not yet started, well, hopefully we can help you find your direction today. Thank you for answering. All right. So how will the IVDR implementation affect your company's content and translation strategy? If you haven't done it yet, those 38% of you, you better get busy. We are coming to the end of the 5-year transition period. And IVDR was put in force by the EU on May 25th, 2017 as a replacement for the prior EU directive. And this latest regulatory change will control the sale, marketing, and use of in vitro medical devices in the European market. The regulation stipulated a 5-year transition period, and IVD manufacturers will have until May 26th, 2022. So that's next week. Better get busy or make plans for working through that grace period. Your devices will have to start coming off the market. So the end of the transition marked is 27th of May, 2025. All IVDD certificates will be void, and there'll be no more placing on the market the device is covered by your existing certificates. So better get busy working through that transition. Some of the key actions you need to take before the launch date. Your application information needs to be provided for your devices and your QMS readiness. The scope of your certification, your provisional transition timings. The manufacturer is responsible for the registration in UDAMED of in vitro diagnostic medical devices, including kits and legacy devices. If you are working with a distributor, it is not the distributor's responsibility, it is yours as the manufacturer. You do need to get that going. Be sure that your intended use conforms to requirements. These things, again, there's been some shifts in some areas in the regulations, and so you're going to want to make sure that you address any of those. Classification is key. Make sure that you're classifying your devices properly under the new requirements, and if that has changed your classification, you'll want to make sure that you are meeting the different requirements and understand how those changes may have affected your device. Assignment of codes in basic UDI. I think we'll get into that a little bit more in detail in another slide, but UDI is also coming into effect in varying stages. They did a transition plan there, and while some things were delayed due to COVID, things are definitely moving off of that delay now. So we need to get those things moving forward. Your notified body will confirm codes and grouping at the time of application. So definitely work with them, and sampling plans drafted by the notified body with certification processes. So again, some of the changes affect the device's classifications and the requirements, of course, increasing as the risk increases with your device. And so if you were operating under a lower classification prior, you're definitely going to want to make sure you've gap assessed to figure out what additional requirements you're going to have to meet. All right, so if we talk a little bit about some of the major changes, the product scope was expanded, and this happened under the regular MDR-MDD transition as well. The inclusion of device software as the absence of any grandfathering provisions may require updates to fielded devices software on any devices that were reclassified. So if you're supporting devices that are still operating in the field, part of your planning needs to include how are you going to ensure that your devices that are already in the market are brought up to speed to meet the new requirements. The reclassification of devices according to risk, which includes reagents and other test chemistries used on the device. Again, the higher classification for some part of your device then can take the entirety of your device up to that next classification. This may necessitate you generating additional documentation that you weren't required to keep prior to the regulation. The notified bodies will provide more stringent oversight. Currently, approximately 80% of a company's in vitro products can be self-certified without intensive notified body involvement, but IVDR is expected to invert this percentage, with 80% or more of IVD products requiring notified body involvement. And in addition to any print or on-device documentation, labeling information must be kept current and available on your company's website. It's amazing to me how often that step is missed in a change management process. People don't necessarily keep a good track of where are all the copies of our instructions for use kept in the organization. All right, and Sumatha, you had a quick comment to add here.
Sorry, Kelly, it was just by mistake. I have clicked on that.
Awesome, no problem. All right, additional changes continued. So another round of guidances came out just this month in May. This guidance was the MDCG 2022-6, and this guidance is to help clarify the significant changes regarding the transitional provision under Article 110 of the IVDR. This guidance document was intended to provide clarification on the concept of significant changes in the design and intended purpose. There's no issuing of new IVDD certificates allowed now. An assessment whether changes are significant changes in the design or intended purpose. Again, if you weren't required to do this under the IVDD, you will now be required to do this going forward. Definitely make sure you get up to speed and understand how this has affected, the specifics of your device and how that works. Sumatha, you want to talk to us a little bit about the classification changes?
Sure, Kelly, thank you for that. And first, I would like to thank everyone who has joined today's webinar. So let's talk about the new classifications and what exactly has changed in it. So if you see here that the IVDR, it specifies 4 risk-based classifications for in vitro devices, that is from Class A to Class D. So the lowest risk classification would be Class A. That means that does not require notified body supervision. But however, you need to make sure that if you are already having a previous classification, now it may have to be reclassified as Class A, then I would suggest that you can also reach to your notified body to make sure that you are aligning with these requirements. And a new or existing products that do not slot easily into a classification, that will automatically be considered as a Class B. So you need to also be focused on this particular classification. And apart from this, Class B, C, and D manufacturers need to be focusing on the subject, that is, they will be having unannounced audits from the notified body. So when we talk about the supplier evaluations in the upcoming slides, I'll be focusing more on this unannounced audits and how you may have to make sure that the suppliers are also following this requirement. And will be required to have a quality management system and technical documentation reviewed. So this is a key important point that you need to focus on. If a device has multiple intended uses, that means with different risk classification, the highest risk classification will be used for compliance with the IVDR requirements. So this is all regarding the new classification. But when it comes to the reclassification, so theoretically, a higher classification for one of these could cause the entire device to be reclassified with a higher risk assessment as well. So this will lead to updating of claims, the revision of the customer facing documentation, or relabeling and re-registration. So I would certainly recommend if anything that is affecting your reclassification, specifically If it is right now, earlier it was a lower risk, and now if you're leading it to a higher risk, so you can reach to the notified body as well. And what would be the notified body will be involving basically in this would be that this promises to create greater administrative burdens on the companies, and very likely will cause backlogs that will in access to the notified bodies as well. So if you're not already engaged in IVDR preparation, the time is right now, you may have to begin with it. So we can go to the next requirements. Yes, thank you, Kelly, for that. So here, if you see the requirements of the quality management system. So here I'll be focusing on the first element would be the strategy for regulatory compliance. So that is basically you will be making sure that the plan, do, check, act is in compliance. So that means Article 10 will be more focused on this area, where the general obligations of manufacturers, that means the quality management system that will address at least the strategy for regulatory compliance, that including compliance with the conformity assessment procedures and procedures for management of modifications to the devices covered by the system. Apart from this, you may also have to consider Annex 9, that is specifically Section 2.2, where the strategy for regulatory compliance to include processes for identification of relevant legal requirements, qualification, classification, handling of equivalence, choice of, I would say, choice of and compliance with conformity assessment procedures. So these are the required, specifically if you are planning to go with the regulatory compliance. And moving ahead with the next one would be the general safety performance requirements. So here, if you see that in the general safety performance requirements, all IVDs that need to meet the requirements of the GSPRs. That means the devices that are within the scope of the IVDR, including IVDs that have an EU in-house exemption. And also make sure that all IVDs will be for devices that are under performance evaluation. Certain requirements of Annex 1 will still apply. So you need to be working on that area as well. And also the requirements are dependent on the device. That means, therefore, the audits will be needed for that all the existing devices, especially on the transition to the IVDR. So you need to make sure that how the audit approach also would change based on the reclassification. And new IVDs and existing CE marked IVDs will need to comply with these requirements by 26th of May this year. So that is where the end of transition period would be. And especially when it comes to the GSPRs, what the notified body or the assessor will be looking for is that the specific labeling requirements, more specific in compliance with the Chapter 3, and specific information for the instructions for use. And also, I would certainly highlight this point, that is in the Chapter 3, if you see a section 20.4.1, where the instructions for use, that's where you need to focus on. And then you will also be audited on the technical documentation that is in compliance with the Annex 2 again. And Annex 13 would be for the performance evaluation and clinical evidence. So this is also a key requirement where you would be focusing mainly on. When it comes to the management responsibility, so this is, again, you can make sure that it is in compliance with 13485 requirements for the clause 5 management responsibility. So whatever has been defined in 13485, you will be able to implement that. And as you know that there would be resource management also would be something similar to the clause 6.2 in that has been defined in 13485. So risk management for the, you will be focusing on based on the ISO 14971, as well as you will also be making sure that there is a risk-based approach across the requirements. Followed by the performance evaluation, product realization, unique device identification. So these are the requirements that you will be mainly focusing on. So then the post-market surveillance system. So this is where you will, if you are complying with the, like specifically based on the reclassification, you will be focusing more on the PMCF as well as the post-market surveillance system. And if there are any incident reporting or field safety corrective actions, so that's where you will make sure that those requirements are also being met. And the last would be the CAPA management, monitoring and measurement. So this would be, again, in compliance with the regular CAPA management system, where you will be implementing the specific requirements. Maybe we can go to the next slide. Thank you. Thank you, Kelly, for this. So if you see here the internal audit process, so once you have implemented all the quality management system, you will also be ensuring that the internal audit process is carried out specifically in compliance with the new regulations, and ensure that the IVDR is listed as an audit criterion. So this is important in your audits. And internal auditors need to be trained and qualified for the IVDR, or you can also make sure that at least ISO 13485 has been covered for the as a part of an auditor's requirements. Audit plan and schedule that need to include IVDR and ensure objectivity and impartiality of the audit process. So these are the requirements. And if you see on the right side in the same slide, where you will see that Annex 9, where you will have the chapter 1 that is more focused on specifically for the internal audit process. Similarly, you will see section 2.2b and section 2.1. So as I was mentioning about the suppliers, so here I would certainly highlight this point on the unannounced audits. So make sure that you are making, especially for the critical suppliers, you have mentioned this in your supplier quality agreement about the unannounced audits. And or else it would be the auditors, when they perform the audit, they would certainly would like to look for these requirements, that how that has been implemented. So make sure that the supplier quality agreement is aligning with these requirements, specifically with the critical suppliers. So the resources, so score of product impact needs to be clearly defined, and then the selection and monitoring. So again, you may have to make sure that there is a supplier corrective action plan has been implemented. If there are any quality specific issues or anything specific to the critical suppliers, that's where you need to bring or make sure that you have implemented that. Control of subcontractors and suppliers, that is the quality agreements that are available. And risk management. So as the risk management, you will be following the ISO 14971. That 2019 would be the latest version. And based on the risk management, that's where you will make sure that the specific risk-based approach has been implemented across in all the processes, specifically for the product as well. And you will be creating the risk management plan, followed by the specific analysis, and then the report will be available. So here, if you see that the risk management documentation, where the risk management plan, risk analysis, evaluation. So these are need to be documented for the, again, based on the classification of the device. And the results of the non-conformities, investigations, if there are any corrective preventive actions during the manufacturing process. So this need to be, make sure that you have everything recorded, documented. I would also like to highlight one point here. When it comes to the supplier risk, that means the processes that are being followed at the supplier end, that also need to be evaluated, and there should be proper measures to be taken. Specifically, you can also, when you are planning for manufacturing plan, that's where you will be able to also focus on the product quality control plans that are available with the appropriate tests that need to be performed. That's where you will be going ahead with the next steps during the production process. And when it comes to the IVDR CE mark, so before we go ahead with the IVDR CE mark, what is actually a CE mark would be? So it is like, it is fixed by the manufacturer, a legal mark. Specifically, it is required for a certification that is issued by the notified bodies. So that's where it's important that you need to comply with this requirement. And if you see in the next following slide, so this is how it should actually look like. So there could be some different variations in the CE mark. So please make sure that you are following the right dimensions, the requirements specified by the guidance documents. So here, if you see, the CE marking shall consist of the initials CE, taking the following form or the image. If the CE marking is reduced or enlarged, the proportions given in the above graduated drawing shall be respected. So, and then the various components of the CE marking, that means that shall have substantially the same vertical dimensions. So that means that is where you need to make sure that those dimensions are being followed. Here comes the necessary steps for your organization to meet IVDR requirements. That means, what are the general obligations and who are responsible for? I have been I think there was a question on the authorized representatives. So yes, so that's where the various different obligations have been defined in the same EU document, where you will find 2017, that is 746, where in the that starts from the obligations from, I believe, from Article 10 onwards, where you will have the obligations defined for specifically for the manufacturer, for the authorized representative, as well as the importers and distributors. So this is all related to the union where they will be focused on. If there are manufacturers who are outside Europe, and if they want to send it, again, it will come back to the importers, as well as, if you see, there is a dotted line for the authorized representative. So that means the manufacturer outside Europe, they will be focused, or they will be in contact with the authorized representatives. That's where they will play a key important role in the product, specifically with the product when it is being brought to Europe. And the different requirements that have been defined in this guidance document, you will be focusing on that, specifically based on the roles and responsibilities for each importer, distributor, and manufacturer. And that's where you will be again going back to the if there are anything that has been revised or changed, that will go back again to the manufacturer who is outside Europe also. So the responsibilities of specifically for the distributors and importers would be, the distributors and importers both need to, they need to verify the CE mark and labeling and declaration of conformity, storage and transport conditions that comply, cooperate in corrective actions, provide samples and access, place only conforming products on the market, ensure traceability, inform supply chain, manufacturer authorities, and notified body on certain issues. So, and if the manufacturer is, today I'm talking about the IVDR, but however, if the manufacturer is also distributing elsewhere, like in Canada, then you may also have to focus on the risk associated with that, that is the foreign risk. And based on that, you may have to also make sure that the importer and distributor, they are complying with those other regulatory requirements that are applicable.
I just want to jump in here really quickly too and say, these are the kinds of things too that notifies bodies will look for in your quality agreements with these people, with these distributors, the importers. Those designations and requirements are especially around reporting of issues in a timely manner. Those are the kinds of things that the inspectors are going to look for and those things need to be very detailed. You need to have processes built on both sides. So you as the sponsor need to make sure that your distributors have appropriate processes in place and timing and everything for when they notify you of a problem. One of the toughest situations you can get into is a bit of a back and forth with who knew when that a problem had happened and how did that information make it back through to the manufacturer. That's easy fodder for inspectors if you don't have that process well defined and very spelled out in your quality agreements between yourselves and your distributors. All right.
Yes.
Post-market surveillance, Sumatha.
Yes, yes, Kelly. So post-market surveillance, here if you see that the post-market evaluation and clinical performance, the newest requirement is the ISO 2019-916 that is released in 2019. So you may be also need to comply with these requirements apart from the EU regulations. So in the performance evaluation is a continual process, and then the stated intended use or purpose statement that is more critical for setting the clinical evidence required. So that is specifically driven by the performance evaluation plan, which needs to include the outline of the different development phases, the sequence and means of determination of scientific validity, as well as analytical and clinical performance. Generally, I have seen that people will be, having questions in and around near to the post-market surveillance, saying that what exactly do I need to record or document in the plan? And from there onwards, what are the data that I need to collect on? So it's basically you will be focusing mainly on the sequence or the determination that is required, the scientific data, the validity, how much, like if you're performing some market research, so what exactly the data you're collecting on, have everything, organized, and then that goes into the PMS, post-market surveillance data. And apart from that, you will also be focusing on the description of potential acceptance criteria, and then you will also have that PMPF planning that is also required. And if you see here complaints and vigilance reporting, that's where specifically events reporting, that would be 2 days if it is very critical reporting that need to be done, and followed by similarly the other 10 days and 15 days based on the criticality. So the time frames of complaint notification from the distributor to legal manufacturer, that is also need to be made sure that these are being followed. And as Kelly was mentioning on the agreement between the manufacturer and the distributor, so the manufacturer has to finally make sure that these kind of requirements are also being met when it comes to the distributor giving the information to the manufacturer. And the Article 82.6, where necessary to ensure timely reporting. So the manufacturer may submit an initial report that is incomplete, followed by a complete report. And also the Article 82.7 that also focuses on potentially a reportable incident. The manufacturer is uncertain about whether the incident is reportable, then it should be like it shall nevertheless submit a report within the time frame that is required. So control of documents and records. So here, again, it would be any standard that is specifically like for the 13485, or it would be EU MDR or IVDR. So the control of documents and records remains pretty much the similar requirements. So you need to ensure that the correct references are made, consider all locations or documents are available. That is important. I have seen, like during the audits when I perform, I have seen that specifically the documents and records, even though the manufacturer has given to a critical supplier or a contract manufacturing organization, and they think that they may not be needing all the specific documents at their end. We have given our supplier, who is the one who is responsible in producing the product. But however, as a manufacturer, since your name is there on the legally on the product, so that's where you need to ensure that you have the right documentation in place. Procedure that defines the control that needed to review, update as necessary, and reapprove documents. Documents of external source need to be identified and controlled. So this is where you will be going around the controlling the documents and records.
And you want to make sure that you point to anything where you're outsourcing as well. So in the case of you're outside the EU and you're working with a distributor, an importer distributor on your behalf, you'll want to make sure that you have defined which pieces of documentation related to your product are either held there, or that the distributor is sending those to you on some sort of periodic basis.
So when it comes to the change control, so specifically this is being guided by the Annex 9, Section 2.4, where the procedure needs to be in place related to the manufacturer shall inform the notified body of any plan of substantial changes to the QMS or the device range covered. It also includes, like, if there is any facility change, no matter as a manufacturer, you might have, again, going back to the contract manufacturing organization. So the supplier might be doing all the production facility. You might be working remotely, having an office, which is not predefined. But however, if there is any change in the facility as well, make sure that that has been notified to the notified body. Significant changes, that is the quality management system reportable to notified body. Design and internal purpose reportable to the notified body again, and approval before implementation. This is important. Design and intended purpose for legal devices will end grace period. So that's where I would recommend that impact assessment is important when there is a change control, even though if it is a minor change based on the risk-based approach, you need to evaluate how critical the change is, and based on that, where all it is impacting, that's where you need to take the necessary actions. Okay, thank you. Annex 1, that is GSPR compliance. So create an analysis table for general safety and performance requirements. So some requirements are similar, but not the same as IVD Annex 1. So that's where you need to make sure that the specific details that are added in IVDR, those are being focused and you are addressing that. Map the device, map the evidence you have to the GSPR. So generally, I would recommend that having a plan, a transition plan, where you can write down or have all the specific requirements from the new regulations, followed by doing a gap assessment of the, like, if you have already implemented all the quality management system based on the IVDD, then I would recommend that taking this new regulations and then do a gap analysis or a gap assessment on the existing documentation. So in this way, you will be knowing like where exactly the changes need to be made. Create a plan to address the gaps that are identified and justification for GSPR. So if you have some justification that may not be applicable for the current requirements, then you can always provide a justification, especially in the quality manual. Also, you can add these justifications. And acknowledge of state of the art. So this is where you will be focusing more on that. And procedure for completing the GSPR checklist. So you can also have a GSPR checklist within the your organization to make sure that you are complying with all the specific requirements. Kelly, would you like to add anything on this requirements for the GSPR?
But we have a quick poll to drop in here to get some ideas on what are your major concerns about moving to this new compliance. Are your primary areas of concern regarding labeling requirements, marketing, clinical data, post-market surveillance reporting, software requirements, UDI requirements, or other? So we'll give you a few more seconds here to answer the poll. And it looks like we're about getting close here, having all our answers coming in. All right. Your primary areas of concern. Wow. All right. So, post-market surveillance reporting and clinical data requirements come in tied there at 38% of you as being the most concern that you have around these regulations changes. Labeling is a close second, along with UDI there with 33%. And marketing requirements is a fairly low concern at 10%. Any thoughts on any of those results, Sumatha?
Yes, Kerry. So as I was expecting on the post-market surveillance reporting, and that's where I could see that on that as well as on the clinical data requirements. So specifically, based on the reclassification of the devices, some of you may have to make sure that you are focusing mainly on the clinical data. Earlier, it might be a low risk of device, and then you might have not considered that. But if it is the risk associated with the current new regulations or reclassification, that's where you may have to ensure that the clinical part is focused on.
Yep, I'm finding that to be very true with the MDD, MDR device transition as well. I think there's a very large group of devices out there that have never had to do these activities before, and so it can be a little bit intimidating. I think once you start going through it, you will find that if you are monitoring your product's performance in the market already, you probably have more of this information already at your fingertips than you think. So definitely go through and look at what information are you guys already looking at from a marketing performance perspective. You may find pieces of data already available to you that maybe you hadn't considered as a possibility. All right, so let's talk a little bit about some compliance tips and tricks. IVDR is very prescriptive. So you're going to want to make sure you do a very thorough gap analysis. You want to be sure you're covering all of those elements. Provide justifications for non-applicability. Use international standards and guidelines for your implementation. And I can't stress enough the regulatory affairs interpretation of regulations, these new regulations. This is really critical, and it will drive how you go through your gap analysis and your non-applicability sections. If you don't have regulatory affairs folks who are experts in your organization already, please consider using consultants to help you with this. You want to make sure that they have experience and specialize in IVDR, the fines, the importation delays, other obstacles, etc., will definitely be a thing. Use the right IVDR terminology. Some of the semantics that happen in our industry can cause problems. And if you can align yourself to the terminology that's being used by the standard as much as possible, and not so much your, sort of internal, what your company calls these things, you're not in a position of having to translate. And as soon as you get into that position of having to translate, you're starting to enter those gray areas of interpretation. And this can lead to, disagreements or, misunderstandings with your notified bodies as they are doing their inspections. Ensure you've got consistency across your technical files. Your intended purpose of the device is very clear. Your red line across the technical documentation, again, make sure that intended purpose is consistent, it's clear, it's the same, and it aligns to IVDR terminology wherever possible. Your performance claims need to be traceable. Can they be supported? This is the goal and the intent of that clinical evaluation data. You also want to be sure you can provide the necessary information to the auditor. Consider your device type, your risk classifications, your system versus assay versus tests, controls versus calibrators, et cetera, et cetera. You want to make sure that you have very clearly defined those elements of your products, and then how that traces back to the regulations very clearly. More compliance tips and tricks, performance evaluation plans. All elements required by the standards need to be included. And even if they're not applicable, then that section of your plan should justify very clearly why this is not applicable to your device. You want to have a strategy for performance evaluation, even for your legacy devices. And your strategy for demonstrating performance evaluation for device families too. You can group these things into families, and how those things are related or similar, is key to include in that documentation. Again, so you don't have to explain these things over and over again. Make it auditable, make it visible, put it in your plan. The stated or intended use and purpose is critical for setting the clinical evidence required. Scientific validity should link to the clear claims that are being made, and this data needs to be current today. Especially if you're talking about grandfathered devices, consider updating those things. Do they need more detail to help drive the justification, especially if it's a device that wasn't previously regulated and has been in market for a long time? Your clinical performance may be from multiple sources. This must be from at least one of the 3 elements listed in annex in the annex. And clinical performance studies must meet the requirements also of the annex in section 2.3. You want to link to the plan for post-market performance follow-up. Further studies may be needed if there are residual risks that are not addressed by the clinical evidence provided. So from a recap, make an application. You're going to have to do this, even if you never had to do it previously. You want your quality system to be ready. And there was a question that somebody asked earlier in the chat. Sumatha, to speak to the quality system questions, is it required to hold a QMS certification from such as 13485 to have an IVDR compliant CE marked product, or can you be working towards that 13485 accreditation?
I believe you can go ahead with the 13485 certification, but however, make sure that you are complying with the new regulations as well.
Yeah, because the 13485 certification is required for the CE mark, independent of IVDR. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Your technical documentation for your product needs to align to those requirements. You are an in vitro diagnostic device, but you're also a medical device. So you want to make sure that your tech files meet those requirements. And then your performance evaluation and clinical evidence. As I alluded to earlier, especially if you haven't had to do this before, you probably have some of this information, whether it's in your marketing information or that kind of information gathering. That's all valid data to use in these situations. You want to make sure that you're gathering that in a systematic way under the elements required for good document control, etc. References, and again, somebody asked in the chat if we will be sending out the slides. We will include those slides in the email you're going to receive after this with the link to the recording. And these references will be in the slide deck for you. Definitely get your hands on these and get started, folks. All right. Are there any, let's see, I'm going to scroll back through. I believe we addressed the question about the QMS certification, 13485. The answer to that is yes, you need to have that because that is how you get your CE mark. You have to have that QMS certification in place first. Let's see, what other questions do we have? Would diagnostic tests, such as a COVID-19 PCR diagnostic assay, generally be considered a Category C device? Sumatha, you have a...
Yes, Kelly. So here it would be the Rule 2 from the guidance document MDCG 2020-16 that would be applicable. So that's where it talks about the category like classification C for the device as well as Class D. So you would be referring to that particular guidance document for further classification requirements.
Perfect, thank you. For a UK-based company, how does Brexit change the need to be IVDR compliant? That's a good question. I am not sure about how those rules are playing into effect.
But however, it depends on the manufacturer where they are located and the targeted market would be. It also depends on, and specifically like UK is also working on the IVDR regulations, and I believe like may not be that much clear enough at this moment, but however, you would be if UK is applicable, UK requirements, that's where you will be reaching your notified body to make sure that those requirements have been applied at your end as a manufacturer.
Definitely. And certainly if you are distributing outside of the UK, you would absolutely still be required to meet those regulations under EU for the other countries that you're distributing into. So again, it's not just about the market that you manufacture in, it's the markets that you're trying to distribute into. That's where you have to consider additional layers of regulations, unless, like I said, if you're only making in the UK and you're only going to distribute in the UK, then you would only follow the requirements laid out to you by the UK. Someone else has asked about key differences between MDR and IVDR. Oh, I don't know if we can do that in a quick summary. Samantha, what do you think?
Yes, Kelly. So what I would say that it's mainly the classifications. They are different. When it comes to the MDR medical devices classification with IVDR classification, it all depends on the risk classification. That's where the classification of the devices has been done. That would be on the high level. But whereas it comes to the if you break down with more specific details in, you would be mainly focusing on the new requirements that are applicable for IVDR. But still, I think we may send you more details by email. If you can leave your email address, then I can give you more details on this.
Awesome. All right. If European patient samples for a registrational study are tested only in a US clinical lab, do IVDR requirements still apply?
So can you repeat the question, Kelly?
Sure. If European patient samples for a registration study are tested only in a US clinical lab, do the IVDR requirements still apply?
Mm-hmm. So yes, I would say it would be applying because the partly the testing which has been done in the US lab, that particular testing will certainly you need to apply those requirements.
Yeah, because the treatment is happening to the patient in Europe, the samples taken from the EU patients are used because of the rules for a performance study, then the patients will have consented and the results are going back to the patient, which are in Europe. So then the tests must comply in that scenario. All right. We have a couple of minutes left. Are there any other questions that anybody might have? Drop those into the Q&A, please. Let's see, really quickly. Am I able to self-certify devices under the IVDR? I believe you still can. In most cases, Class A devices can be self-certified unless they're sold sterile, while Class B, C, and D devices will require conformity assessment by a notified body as designated under the IVDR. I hope that answers your question. All right, and Sumatha, how do I choose a notified body for my device?
This would be from NANDO. So that is NANDO. That's where a new approach notified designated organizations. So you will be going into this particular site where it has been given the list of notified bodies, and you can apply to the specific notified body. It's not mandatory that which one you would be choosing, but you can certainly go for that. Thank you,
Perfect.
Terry, for sharing.
Yep, I just dropped the link to that website in the chat, and I will double check if it's not in the slide deck already. I'll make sure it lands in the slide deck before we send those slides out to everyone. And so with that, I think I'm going to call it a wrap. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. We really appreciate everyone's time and some very good questions, and we hope that you found this informative. There will be a follow-up email coming from Qualio with links to this recorded session, as well as the slide deck for you to keep. Do let us know if you have any other questions. Thank you all and have a great day.